Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Napoleon, and we are joined by a very special guest, Dillon. Dillon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm Dillon. I am a casual movie enjoyer, mediocre history buff, but a hardcore opinion giver. So I'm ready for this.
I love it. We love opinion givers here on Movies and Us. It's great. It's great. Dillon is a friend of the podcast and has been on some of our past episodes as well. So go check those out. Excited to dive into this conversation today. I think this is going to be an interesting one on Napoleon. So, Sarah, do you want to start us off with an IMDb summary for Napoleon?
Sure. An epic that details the checkered rise and fall of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte and his relentless journey to power through the prism of his addictive, volatile relationship with his wife, Josephine.
All right. And let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Napoleon. Dillon, as our guest, will have you share first.
For me, Napoleon is like if your mom says we have Oppenheimer at home.
Oh, I love the comparison to Oppenheimer. We'll have to unpack that. Yes. Yes. Okay. Sarah, what was your one-sentence summary?
Mine is heavy is the head that wears the hat.
Amazing. My one-sentence summary is, to all the Ridley critics saying, you think you're so great because you know how to make an epic movie? My answer is precisely so.
Okay, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
I'm excited to dive in. I think we've got a spectrum of opinions, and we've got opinion givers here, so this is going to be great. Let's start off with our initial thoughts of Napoleon, and typically we keep our first section spoiler-free, but because this is based on history, we're just going to dive right in. So y'all have full free reign to talk about any parts of this movie. So, Dillon, I am intrigued to hear your thoughts about the at-home version of Oppenheimer here. Tell us your thoughts.
It was. I did not enjoy it. It felt disjointed, disconnected. Like it felt like there was lots of fluff. Like there's lots of party scenes. His life just kind of, I don't know. You just kind of flip through it really fast. But I don't really feel like I got a lot of meat. Napoleon as a character is interesting. I don't know how historically accurate it was. Josephine, I've done a little research, doesn't seem super historically accurate, but both of those characters were interesting, but I feel like a lot was skipped over in their relationship. I don't know, I was left wanting more.
Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that more might have been that you maybe would have loved to see. Sarah, what were your thoughts about Napoleon?
Yeah, I agree with what Dillon said. I did not have a good time watching this movie, which also is not surprising to me. So, just take everything I say about this movie with a grain of salt, because I tend to not like period pieces, and I also don't like war movies. So, this is not a Sarah movie, and I knew that going into it. But I tried to give it a chance. For me, I wish that this film wasn't as grand as it is. I wish that they would have given themselves a smaller scope. So let's focus on this part of Napoleon's life so that we can really learn about this character and really explore him or explore his relationship with Josephine. I feel like I went into this movie not really knowing a whole lot about Napoleon, but I left the theater having not gained much either. So I feel like I didn't get to know this emperor any better than I already knew him. And the battle scenes are incredible. The, costuming and set design and all of these things are very good. And I feel like this is visually a well-made movie, but for me, the characters just weren't robust enough. So there wasn't enough for me to latch on to really be emotionally invested into the story.
Yep. I am not surprised by either of your critiques. I actually have the same ones for this movie, but I really loved this movie, and I think that Ridley Scott is an incredible organizer. I think that's one thing that I was like reflecting on at leaving this movie is that the first of all the dedication to doing real production sets and props and all of that and not go the cheaper CGI route. I respect so much, and I think it pays off in this movie with the epicness. I think really lands well, and it lands well for this story and for this historical figure. So I just see a lot of potential for what this movie could have been. I think that Ridley Scott needs to be paired with a really great screenwriter, and I think that's the problem is that he's got his superpowers. He's built his career in advertising. There are some shots in this movie that are absolutely stunning and so evocative, but the script is the problem with this movie and where it chooses to pace itself, where it chooses to focus on. I thought that your comparison to Oppenheimer was really apt, Dylan. I had kind of a similar thought, which is Oppenheimer is also about a great man, but there's so many themes and nuances and complexity that the movie invites you to ponder, and it's really meaty intellectually and emotionally for who this person is and the larger themes that he represents, and I wanted that for this movie as well. I don't think this movie has anything interesting to say about Napoleon. I think it also like focuses on a lot of the stereotypical things and character traits of this historical figure that we already knew, and I wish the movie invited us into these larger themes around power and corruption and believing your own narrative and your destiny and all these things that I think are really fascinating about Napoleon, but the movie doesn't really invite us into. So my problems with this movie are really around um, the script. And I think that the execution on all of the other aspects of the filmmaking, the cinematography, the managing the production sets, all of that, I thought was fabulous. So I feel conflicted about this movie. I think I have some very similar critiques, but there's potential. And I think Ridley does something that a lot of filmmakers cannot do and choose not to do sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had a similar thought while watching of like what is this movie trying to get me to think about? You know, like I was sitting there and I was like, okay, what themes am I going to try and pull out of this that aren't actually there? And I just started making like a mental list in my mind of like, oh, we can think about this instead. And so I was trying to like layer meaning into this, but I see what you mean, Jen, and I do agree. I think that the script is the weakest part of this whole movie, and if that had been better, I this could have been as good as Oppenheimer. But I think the script really lets it down.
Yeah, I wish I had something else to offer, but I think you're both spot on. Unfortunately, it just did not come together.
So let's talk a little bit about the script, shall we? And which parts didn't work for you, which parts did work for you. I think this is kind of an interesting task for any screenwriter to figure out this entire person's epic life story, where they choose to focus, where they spend and dwell a lot of scenes and spend a lot of time in versus let's just montage it or gloss over and jump to the next piece. Where are the parts that you think could have been interesting, and then where are the parts that really just didn't work for you at all? Let's dive into that a little bit.
This might be a controversial take. I don't know.
I
But
love
I
it.
I wanted more time with him in exile. He got
Oh,
exiled
interesting.
twice, and throughout both exiles, I think we spend like 2 minutes of screen time like on an island. And I feel like putting this great character who is super ambitious, like very passionate about his wife, all this other stuff, like taking that personality that just desires and wants so much and putting them into isolation, like that sounds like a very transformative, very interesting time that like I think the first time he was in isolation for 7 years, you can't tell me he didn't change or have like darker moments or like evolve through that. Then we just skip right past it, but instead we have like lots of fluff like party scenes that don't really add a lot for me about the character or about Josephine. And so for me, like, cut party scenes and give me more time of like Napoleon writing letters or like going crazy on the island and like show me how he transformed out of that.
That is a fascinating take. Yeah, honestly, they could have spent like an entire movie with this like really interesting character study. Starts with like him getting exiled. The movie's focused on him in exile in Elba the first time around, and then your climactic scene is him trying to take everything back at Waterloo and failing completely. And that's the big epic scene. End movie. You know, like that. That would be a great movie. Let's just take that little snippet. Yeah.
It would. It so would.
And I think that's what I wanted from this movie is I think that they just bit off more than they could chew, and trying to tell this man's life over so many years, like it's too much even for a 2.5 hour movie, even for Ridley Scott. So I really wish that they had just picked a narrow sliver of his life and let's focus on that, and then really dive deep into this character, learn more about him, and then you can more easily weave in some of these themes that you want to point out about our world today. I think if they had gone narrower and just focused on his exile, that's a brilliant idea. That would be so fun. Another thought that I had is like focus solely on his military prowess, and uh
Yes.
and just because there was almost
Mm.
this, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm not a history nerd, but there was almost this like he can't lose
Yep.
thing about
Hmm.
him because he just kept winning, and even if he lost he still won and gained more power. And so that is fascinating to dive into that psyche of a man who just keeps winning battle after battle after battle until he's finally stopped. And so I think that that could have been a really interesting character study. And then my other thought was you can go deep with him and Josephine and explore both of these people who were both
Mm.
complex and very dysfunctional and had a very toxic relationship yet seemed to actually love each other. That also could have been interesting, and you can extrapolate different themes out of that as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways that this movie had gone, and I think if they had narrowed their focus a little bit, then they could have created a more rich and dynamic movie.
Well, what's fascinating about that is I read that there's a 4-hour cut version of this movie that
Mhm.
includes way more scenes with Josephine.
Whoa.
I wonder what that movie's like and if it has the time to dive deeper into that relationship, because I think that this movie seems to be, or the script specifically seems to be most captivated by that relationship. If you think about like every battle scene is kind of a vehicle to get him either leaving or back home to Josephine, and all of the like strife that he experiences emotionally by being away from her. And the movie also ends with that three words, his three final words, and the last word is Josephine. So the movie seems to be most captivated by that aspect of him. And it's actually not the movie that I wanted. I wanted this to be a process movie focused on his military genius and give me some big battle scenes, show me all of the like locations and strategy that he's putting into, and then maybe end with his invasion into Russia and the fact that he just gets kind of too, his head gets too big and he overestimates the negotiation power that he has there and kind of comes back home having lost like 400,000 men or something ridiculous. um, but instead, the movie seems most captivated by this relationship with Josephine, and I was trying to think about like why that choice, and I wonder if it's because it's a distinctive aspect about Napoleon as a historical figure is he is this highly successful, incredibly powerful man, and yet he's got this soft spot and almost this insecurity when it comes to his relationship with Josephine. And I wonder if the script was originally just like most captivated by that dissonance and wanted to portray those big battle scenes juxtaposed with this man who just wants to be loved by the person that he loves most, and she is always elusive in that. And I think we've seen so many like great men just kind of in their personal lives, in their personal lives also be arrogant and kind of controlling and can do what they want and whatnot. But Napoleon is unique in that he doesn't, he has that dissonance, and that is pretty interesting about him.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the movie focuses so much on that relationship, but I don't I don't feel like that relationship like comes to anything. You know, like we see a lot of scenes of them together and we hear his reading of his letters to her and we see their conversations, but like it doesn't reveal much, I don't think, about either of these characters. And yeah,
True.
you get to see like his insecurities, you get to see that they seem to love each other, but I don't know. I just kept wondering, like, why are we doing this? Like, what is the point that you're trying to make about these people other than just a dramatic retelling of history, which is fine. Like, if that's the goal, that's fine. But I don't know. There so much screen time is devoted to them, and it just didn't. I don't know. It didn't like pack a punch to me, which is a real shame because I think that could have been interesting because they're both dynamic characters, and yet somehow those scenes just did not work for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. The relationship I think is probably the most fascinating part of the movie to me, but it I mean kind of what y'all are saying, it just skims the surface. The movie struggles to go, like beneath the waves. It struggles to dive and get into that meat. Because there's some really interesting stuff, like especially in reading some of these letters and like background on the two, like there's so much here that's just fascinating, and they seem to maybe hint at it. But, like you had 2.5 hours, like come on, like go a little deeper. It's very frustrating. I think this could have been great, and I think I'm a little upset with how much I don't like the movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, had to get that off my chest.
No, no, it's so real. Especially because if you're really excited for this movie too, and then it's kind of a letdown. Um,
Yeah.
it has all of the aspects that could make it great. It's got Ridley Scott the helm. It's tackling like a very fascinating, both like the inner life and the outer life historical figure. Like, hello, this should be awesome. But I think Sarah, your point that you brought up earlier around where this movie chooses to spend its time probably is its biggest, you're right, its biggest downfall, because we can't go deep in any of these scenes and really know these people, know these characters, because there just wasn't time. And even the time that it did give, I felt like it wasn't used efficiently and well enough to kind of paint a interesting portrait of these people. They're kind of caricatures in a lot of ways from beginning to the end. And we never have the time to really know who they are and where those, like, what do they desire, what does Josephine desire, like, still I don't really know.
Yeah, and I think obviously he is a historical figure, and so there's I maybe we're more willing to like go along with the story just because he is a historical figure and we know that all of these things happen, but I want to know these characters. I want to know their motivations because to me, I kept watching these battle scenes that were really, really well done, and you can tell cost a ton of money.
So
Uh,
much.
but I was just wondering, like, why are
Oh,
we doing this? Why? Because Napoleon, with a wave of his hand, kills hundreds of thousands of men just with a wave of his hand. And I'm like, I want to know why we're in this battle. I want to know why he is doing this. Is it just so that he can stay in power? Is it an ego thing? Like, I need to know about this character and why he's doing this thing. And the film just doesn't give you a lot of that. It's just like, oh, here's a battle. Okay, then he goes home to Josephine. And oh, here's another battle. And then oh, Josephine. And I'm just, I wanted more to make those things more meaningful. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
No, you're not alone.
yeah. I think that's one of the other critiques I have of this movie is they didn't even make the battle scenes exciting. Like that was your moment to shine, Ridley Scott. Like this is the big epic part of the movie. And uh I think there needed to be more pacing in the action. Like it's a lot of the battle scenes are kind of like one tone. There's the okay, we're getting ready for this, and then the two sides collide and meet each other, and then it's just pure just mayhem at the same volume, and then it's over. And I think that they they need to study like great action sequences and then apply the same principles of there's an emotional roller coaster that we need to go on, but there's also a sense of like time and space and who all of the positioning of all of the different parties are in this. Like I think um the Battle of Waterloo is a perfect example. That actual battle is so interesting based on the positioning of Prussia versus the British and the strategy that Napoleon had going into it to try and like fork them away from each other, and the fact that that didn't work. Like that inherently has so much interesting tension and stakes and drama associated with it because it's different from what Napoleon's strategy and what his plans and what he calculated was. But the whole time I'm watching that Waterloo scene, and I'm just like, the actual battle is more interesting than the movie is making it. And usually it's the other way around. It's like the battle is a little bit more straightforward, and the movie does the like big swell dramatic stuff to make it really exciting. But it just felt like a missed opportunity. So I think even those battle scenes, I think we needed more of a sense of strategy, how that strategy is either executed well or gets thwarted, and the positioning of all of the parties at play, and how they're going to execute. I think that would have made those battle scenes also just in and of themselves as like entertainment a lot more exciting for this movie as well. So the battle scenes I also kind of left me wanting more.
Yeah, I enjoyed the battle scenes. Lots of good visual stimuli. I was interested, but it didn't like the timing of the battles. I don't think made sense. And I could be wrong on this. It was a long movie, but I felt like watching the Waterloo battle at the end that I think it was about the same amount of time or maybe even shorter as the very opening battle of just
Yeah.
Napoleon taking the fort. It was like, this is Waterloo. Like, make the other stuff smaller. Like, we should really be going in depth here. But it seemed like each battle kind of got the exact same amount of screen time.
Mm.
It was kind of similar emotions. You had some pretty set pieces, but like they just kind of kept the pace, and just pushed it through.
Yeah, that first battle, I was so confused, honestly, because there wasn't that sense of place like you were
Hmm.
talking about, Jen, and I couldn't understand the space between people. I also couldn't tell like who was who because it was just a bunch of like white dudes in 1700s dress. And so
During the night,
at
lit up
night,
by
my
like
God,
fire in their
yes.
faces.
So I was so confused during that, and people are firing at each other, but I couldn't tell who was who and what they were firing at or like where they were firing to and how far apart people were, and I was just it was so confusing. And so I do agree that I think they could have done a better job helping us really just setting the scene basically so we understand better what is going on. Though I would imagine, especially in a battle like that, it's just mayhem and confusion, so maybe that's what they were going for, is just you're just trying to kill the enemy and it's insane and we are in the insanity with him. I don't know. But that one, oh, I was so lost. It's like, oh no, this is going to be a rough movie if this is how we're starting.
Yeah. They needed to do what Top Gun Maverick does so beautifully, which is like tell you what the plan is, how difficult it
Yes.
is, and then
Yeah.
showcase them succeeding and or not, and um, each step of the way, kind of showcasing that. But it would be a different movie. They would need that again. It's time from somewhere. So that's another, I think, flavor of this that they could have focused on is just the military prowess, and like you're saying, Sarah, that being tied with his pride, and then the ways that he towards the end of his military career over calculates, overestimates, because he starting to believe that he truly is invincible, and that confidence then um overriding his sense of like judgment. And maybe we can see some of the scenes where he has people that are doubting the plans or raising concerns, and he just shuts them down because he believes in his mythology that he truly is destined for greatness, and he's been invincible. If you've been invincible for like a period of 10 years through like the domination of Europe, like I too would probably be overestimating a lot by the end, but that being his ultimate downfall is like a really interesting story about just the nature of humanity too, and I think that'd be great.
I mean, honestly, that Battle of Waterloo could have probably been the whole movie. Like,
Yes.
if it is like
Fair.
as complex as you guys are saying, like,
Yeah.
yeah, man, like let's lay out the process, and in that you can see his ego, and then things go wrong and you get to see his genius trying to maneuver, but his ego blocks his genius from actually being genius, and then everything goes to crap. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, that could be a whole movie. This movie just does too much. Like, Napoleon was too ambitious,
And
just
so
like
was the
Emperor
movie.
Napoleon. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great point.
We need this to be like a 6 movie series where you just give let's just give Ridley Scott all of the money to make like a really dedicated deep study into Napoleon and recreate all of the battle scenes minute by minute.
Here's
That's what
here
I want.
okay, here's my
That's what I want.
counter proposal to you,
Okay.
is we get, like, the dream team of directors,
Oh.
and
They
each
each get a battle
one
to film.
well, yeah, that too, but, like, each one can take, like, a specific subset of his life, and you have,
Uh,
like, a very, like, narrow scope, and then
Mm,
they can, like,
oh,
fully explore it, and so you
yes.
can get, like, these different takes on this character told through different visual styles. Like, that could be really fun.
That could be so fun.
Wouldn't that be great? We could get a
that
bunch of
would.
Napoleon content, but it would all be interesting and dynamic and different. I think that would be fun.
I love it. This would be like New
Great.
York Stories, but Napoleon version.
Yeah,
Yes.
let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Wow.
I would I would watch that.
Mm. And the directors can, like, bid for which
Mhm.
which period of life that they want.
Yes. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Highest demand is that Exile movie, the introspective Exile movie
Oh,
for some, like, directors that really are captivated by that, yeah. While we're on the topic of the battle scenes, there the specific, like, second half of the Austerlitz, battle scene with the ice, the shots of the men falling into the water, the red blood, like, oozing, and the men and the horses, like, falling into, this giant below freezing icy lake. I thought that that was the moment where it showcased what Ridley Scott does so well. And you can see his roots starting in advertising, where you have such a short period of time to create a sense of atmosphere and mood and emotion visually. I thought like that was a perfect microcosm of what Ridley's great at. And if we could if we had the better opportunity to pair that with a better script, like it's a match made in heaven, like he knows how to create those imagery and visuals and cinematography that are so evocative. um he's not as great as the like at the like character study like aspects of this movie, but when he's using his superpowers well for a moment that is right and crafted correctly, it sings. It really sings. And that Austerlitz second half battle was where I was like, this is what this movie could have been. You're pairing the emotion with the visuals, and then ideally you're pairing it. It's anchored back into this character and these themes, and this could have been fabulous. So that's the scene that I was like, I love this. I'm on board for this. I'm advocating for you, even though I know this is like flailing.
I'm I'm so glad you mentioned that scene in particular because I think that's a perfect example for me where uh, let me start this over. So I agree that like those scenes sing, and I was like getting really wrapped up in it. The cannons get unveiled, like I'm loving all of this, but it kept multiple times throughout the movie. I kept getting jarred out of that singing. It was like they were, having trouble finding their pitch. Just to have to bring the analogy back home, because they seem to lean really heavily into like the gore aspect and trying to make these like really, gritty battle scenes, but the CGI on some of it and just the decisions for like how much blood to let out was so like comically bad in my opinion. At times, like at times it was great, but there was like fire that would go off at one point. Like a horse gets shot in the chest with a cannonball, and like it just looked bad. Like it looked like CGI from like a long time ago, in my opinion. As the dudes were like falling into the ice, like some of it was super realistic, but others it was like they would literally just like step off into it, and then it would pan to underneath of them, and there's like gallons of blood pouring out from underneath of them. It was like they fell. There was already a hole there. They just fell. Like, why is there blood pouring out of this person? So it's just those little things. It was like I was captivated by the moment in the scene, and they did a really good job of stepping through those battles, especially the one on the ice. But I just kept getting rudely awakened from that blissful slumber with bad CGI.
Yeah, I think that ice scene, and there were multiple points throughout the movie that this happened, but there was a point in the ice where I was like, okay, I've seen enough of this. Like, people are dying in the ice. I understand. Can we keep it moving? Like, there were multiple
Mm,
points in the movie during battles where I had that thought of like, I've seen this. You've showed this to me over and over and over and over and over again. I've already seen an entire army fall through the ice. Why do I need to see even more people falling through the ice? I understand. So I think for me, again, it just all ties back to the the character and the story itself, and so I wasn't as invested in what was going on, and so seeing those images, while beautiful, after a while I tired of it because I didn't have like a deep connection to what was happening on the screen.
I actually had that same feeling too, which is that I think this is so evocative in general, but it's not connected to anything, right? Like you feel the emotion, but then you're like, this is not anchored in a person, a story, a theme. So then you're just like, it's kind of dismembered from its body. And if we could take that same ability to create visuals and tie them and have them be rooted in um, like meatier themes and characters and moments and whatnot, then it's things. But otherwise, you're right. It's dismembered from the body, and then they're just beautiful artistic visuals that Dylan feels like weren't executed well in the CGI, which is fair. Which is fair. There's a lot of red, a lot more red than is actually happening.
Yeah, yeah, there was. It was, and I agree, the gore did kind of feel misplaced sometimes. In that opening battle, when the horse takes
Oh
the
my
oh
god.
my
cannonball to the chest, I was
gosh.
like, oh no, this is not for me. It was, oh, that was rough.
Yeah, but it like gore is one thing, and I am a war like movie person, so like I sometimes can like enjoy the like this is what war is like, like they're like trying to give you that
Yeah.
gritty take.
Yeah.
But like the horse took the cannonball to the chest, and I wasn't like, oh poor horse. I was like, that's an alien. I was like, oh no no, that's its like innards like jiggling, but like it didn't look real. It just looked
Yeah, it was bad.
fake, and it had that like highlighted line around it that you see when they just like insert like, I don't know what they do, but they insert the CGI. It just it no part of me was like, oh poor horse, which is what I should have been thinking, or like, oh gross. It was just, wow, really? That's the best we can do?
It's like the first 20 minutes of this movie
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just felt so like needlessly shocking. Like,
Yes.
we're gonna just slap you in the face with gore because we're a gritty war movie. Get ready. I was like, really? Did you? Okay, that's how we're doing this. Okay.
Well, then they
Honestly,
make the whole point of I think it's his brother who goes over to like dig out the cannonball out of the horse and toss it back, or was it Napoleon that tosses
Napoleon
it
does
back?
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and tosses it back to his brother or something like that. Yeah, and you're like, okay, this is supposed to
Honestly,
mean something, but I don't
that
really get
horse
it.
dying, that horse dying set the tone for me for the movie. Like, I
Probably
was
good indicator.
open, and then that happened, and I went, "Okay, I think I know how this is gonna go." Also, am I crazy, but did they, like, just not put makeup on Joaquin Phoenix, really, for, like, aging? Because he starts the movie in, like, 1776 or whatever, and he looks like he's
It's the same, yeah.
40, 50 years old, and then when he dies on the island in, mid whatever 1800s or early 1800s, he still looks the same. It's just you can't tell a biopic without like making him look younger, making him
Yep.
look older. Because I think when he was like the Marie Antoinette beheading, I think he was in his like late 20s, and he
Oh
definitely
yeah.
does not look 20 at the start of that movie.
Yeah. Which I actually think like for the like goal of the that Toulon scene, that battle for the fort, it
Yeah.
actually takes away from the movie's point because the whole point is like he was so young and he had this like military genius and instinct in him and he's young and ambitious and willing to like go for it. Like you kind of lose that because he looks like a grown man who like
Yeah.
would know how to do this. You know, you kind of want like honestly someone that looks even younger to create that effect of like, wow, he's so young and he's able to lead all of these men. Like clearly he is destined for greatness and he believes it too, you know, takes away from all
Yeah.
that.
This movie
Yeah.
hurt me.
Oh no. You took a cannonball to the chest in battle,
Yeah.
Dylan. So sorry.
Oh, you tied it back in. Oh,
Very good.
it could have been so much more,
Oh
and it feels
yeah.
like there was just little choices, like multiple little choices that just really added up to bad.
Yeah. And I think that's why I still have a soft spot for this movie, to be honest, is because there was potential and I see the potential. It just didn't capitalize on it at all. I think there are other movies where you're like, I don't even know how I would reconstruct this. But this one, it's got all the ingredients. It's just decision making and script execution. I think the script really, really hurts this movie significantly.
Hmm.
Okay, I have a question.
God.
How did you guys feel about Joaquin as Napoleon? Obviously, he needed makeup to make him look younger when he was supposed to be young and not a 50-year-old man. But how did you feel about him in the role, just in general?
So I, so I, this split love and hate relationship. Um, I really enjoyed his nonverbal communication. He pulled off like this weird, sad little dude persona very well, and just like the creepy, like staring with no emotion in situations like that stoicism, but he has a like unique brand of stoicism with this. I thought was really, really good. Um, him talking, some of his line delivery was great. Some of the like jokes he almost delivered, like when he found out for the second time he was being exiled and just starts laughing, like some of that was really good. But like no accent bothered me.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and I
Same.
didn't think it would. I think Sarah might have even mentioned that before I even went to go see it, and I was like,
I'm
"Oh, that's,"
sorry.
and I was like, "No, that's fine." And then I started watching it, and I was like, "This, he's French. Why does he sound like Joaquin Phoenix?" Um, and yeah, so nonverbals loved. I thought those were extraordinarily well done. Like multiple times watching his face, I was uncomfortable. But verbals, I mean, fine acting, but like the accent really just pulls you out of a period piece.
Yeah. I uh he is the right choice for this role. I think he is the right actor for this because he can toe that like nuanced um distance and character so well. But I'm gonna go back to the script, honestly. I'm gonna keep bragging on about it. I'm sorry guys, but like I think that he isn't given enough to work with and he's the script makes him to be a fool in a lot of scenes, and I think he does that. But I think that had he been given more and been able to showcase more dimensions of Napoleon through the script, I think that he could have done really well. I think he is the right actor for this um, because he can do awkward and like the social awkwardness of Napoleon historically is fascinating. He's not this like incredibly charismatic and very suave, great man. You know, like there is this awkwardness about him, and I think that comes out really well in some of those scenes with Josephine. Joaquin's the right person to play that awkwardness. He's got the insecurity, like all of that, the volatility. I think Joaquin's the perfect person to play it. And the other aspect of it is that he can be that commanding presence with his men as a military commander. Joaquin has the aura that he can be on screen to play those scenes as well. Um, I just think that wasn't given much with the script. So I think that that is my biggest qualm with it. The scene that really did me in, where I was like, oh, okay, I think I know what the kind of movie this is when they're doing I think the takeover, the coup, and there's a point where Joaquin says, "You think you're so great because you have boats," to one of the British men, and I was like, "Oh, this is a
Yeah.
terrible line of dialogue." And it also just it I literally laughed out loud in the theater because it's ridiculous coming from this man that we're supposed to take so seriously for this character study movie. Um, and I think that's indicative of like what Joaquin was given to work with. I think he's the right person for it.
Well,
Sarah,
that's
what were your
interesting.
thoughts? Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead,
go
Dylan.
ahead. Too many thoughts. That was interesting because the scene where he's like, the boats line. I actually didn't think that was like bad writing. I thought that was them trying to show like how much of a weird dude Napoleon was, because he's like so
Mm.
serious and whatever. But it for me it was like he's this emperor general person, but then like that line was like, oh, he's just a child.
Mm.
Like, that's how his mind works, is he was just throwing a tantrum, because I felt like there were some other moments like that. But I don't know, maybe I was trying to put something into the movie that wasn't there. Maybe Napoleon wasn't like that, and it was just bad writing.
No, I think that's a good point, which is that this movie does seem interested in making him seem like a fool in a lot of scenes. There's some moments where he's doing some like negotiating with the czar as well, where I was like, they're making him look like an idiot, but the Napoleon as a historical figure was incredibly uh tactful and strategic
Mm.
and planful, and I don't and maybe it's the fact that the movie doesn't show any of that at all, and they should have in the battle scenes, and then maybe that play together could work really well. But I don't think the movie does enough to showcase how brilliant Napoleon was as well. It's purely focused on like making him to be this like ridiculous fool.
Well, and I will say, reading, because I was fascinated enough to go like read some of his letters to Josephine. He is
Those are accurate.
unhinged.
Yeah.
He is definitely like, man child does seem like a good fitting word. He uses great diction, great syntax, like seems very intelligent and well spoken, but like that man is not stable. So I do buy into the like he literally just threw tantrums at times, but I don't know. I don't know how fully grounded that is, or if that was just his relationship with Josephine that like all reason and logic left him.
Yeah, I would have to maybe learn a little bit more about like what his persona was like with other like public figures, country leaders and stuff. But I think that the dichotomy of his inner life and kind of in his personal relationships, particularly with Josephine, he is more of this man child. And then I would assume that when he's negotiating with Britain, that he's not as ridiculous. I don't know, but the movie seems to lean like fully heavily on both his inner and outer life as him being a man child, and I think that there's probably like a little bit more to that story than like he's probably much more tactful than that. I would assume. Maybe this is me also just feeling like this movie is a pretty scathing like review of Napoleon in general. Um, I'm intrigued to hear y'all's thoughts on the ending text on screen, just listing like the numbers of people dead and how that plays in with the rest of the movie. But before we get there, Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts about Joaquin because we haven't heard your perspective on that.
I think he was a bad choice. Love Joaquin. He's a great actor. But I agree with you, Dylan, that there were certain moments when he wasn't speaking that I was like, oh, okay, that's really good. But almost any time he would open his mouth, I was like, oh no, this is not the business. Like, nope. Mm-mm. And I think especially because Napoleon was significantly younger during these events portrayed in this movie, they needed to have somebody younger because I feel like that says so much more than if you have like a 50-year-old dude
Mm.
doing all of these things. So if you have a younger guy in his 20s going through these things, he's exiled, I think, in his 30s, if I'm not mistaken. Like, that paints a very different picture of what's going on. And I feel like that would almost lend itself better to the ambition and these like fits of rage and the insecurity and all of these things, all of his erratic behavior might make a little bit more sense if he was younger. I feel like we got like a more stoic version of Napoleon. Like you could tell that he's not stable, but I feel like a lot of it is beneath the surface rather than very obvious. And I don't know. I feel like a more like a younger actor portraying him might have been better. And then to also, to your point, Jen, like fully flesh out the screenplay a little bit more to explore these different facets of this character would have made it, I think, better. So I don't know. For me, Joaquin wasn't the right choice, and the screenplay wasn't great. So it just is not a good combination.
That's an interesting perspective around like the that if the movie chose to highlight his youthfulness, perhaps it makes a lot of the behaviors of Napoleon in this movie feel a little bit more understandable. I think that's a fair I think that's a fair assessment because then if we go back to the you think you're so great because you have boats scene, right? Like if you're like a
Hmm.
25-year-old, 30-year-old dude saying that, it's like, oh, you really aren't experienced enough yet to know how to handle those situations. So I don't know, perhaps they that was like a mismatch in expectation too. You know, like you would assume that like a 50-year-old man has like lived enough life to know how to like manage relationships with foreign leaders. And if you're a younger, ambitious, aggressive man, maybe they would be more willing to say something like that. I don't know. It's an interesting thought though. I'm like reimagining all of those scenes now with a younger person and seeing how that fits.
I think we just wanted a different movie. And there's a lot of different versions of this different movie that we could have. Because I also do think like if okay, casting an older person to play this historical figure, okay, cool. What are you trying to achieve with that casting choice? Like I just it didn't feel purposeful to me. Like because sometimes in a movie about a historical figure it's not historically accurate, but liberties are taken to make a larger point either about the character or these themes or the world around us, whatever. But I don't know, it just it felt like they chose Joaquin. Obviously he's a great actor, he's very very good at what he does, but I wanted that choice because it's so different from history to actually lead us to think about something else, and his casting for me didn't do that. So I don't know, again, that's just me wanting more and wanting a different movie, and it is what it is.
I think that like the choice with Joaquin again is kind of similar to them not using their superpowers and strengths well because what Joaquin can do is an incredibly nuanced character study. And that's precisely what this movie doesn't do. You know, like it's
Mm-hmm.
what he's great at is conveying the full swirl of emotions at once. And I think maybe the movie tries to do that with some of the scenes with Josephine, but it doesn't come through because the script's not great. But that's what Joaquin can do well and bring that interesting commentary on all of the like competing sides of Napoleon as a person and how they're in tension with each other. Doesn't but the movie doesn't spend enough time on that. So if we had the character study version of this movie, that's where Joaquin can really shine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
But you're right, he is older.
Yeah. Okay, so we can have the Joaquin character study version of the movie. That one's spoken for. We just need to pair him with the director.
Maybe that's the Exile movie that Dylan's advocating
Ooh,
for, you know, because
Oh,
he is the
that.
right age.
Oh,
I
please.
think he
yes.
dies when he's like 50 something, 52.
Oh, that would be so good.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Exile,
Joaquin in
Joaquin,
Exile.
perfect. This is going to be a great movie.
Hmm.
I'm just left with so many questions about Napoleon as a character study, as a like battle master. Like I
Yeah.
really hope somebody makes a biopic about him one day so that I can learn more about Napoleon.
We need 10 directors to make this deep study of all the aspects of him. What will be interesting about that idea that you had, Sarah, was I think each director is captivated by different things and they would draw out something totally different
Yes.
from this character this historical figure, and there is enough with Napoleon as a historical figure that you could draw out, honestly, so many different dimensions and themes. Yeah.
And I think that's why this movie is so frustrating, is
Yes.
because there's
Yeah.
so much to this character. And even as I was watching, I was like, I can pull so many themes out of this that are so relevant for today. And the film doesn't seem to be interested in any of that, in exploring the character, in exploring these themes. It's just like, dude with Josephine, dude in battle, dude with Josephine. Like, come on, this can be so much richer and more exciting because it's all there.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
frustrating movie.
I'm curious your thoughts on the ending text on screen. This battle, this many dead. This battle, this many dead. How did you receive that? The cherry on top of this Sunday that you didn't enjoy, and then how did that maybe how you put that in conversation with the rest of the movie? Seems like an intentional choice for them to include that.
Yeah, I struggled throughout this movie, as we have discussed, because I kept wondering if, like, again, I was wondering what this movie is trying to convey. So in those battle scenes, when he's just standing there and just with like a flick of his hand, thousands of people are murdered. And I was like, okay, is this trying to be like trying to show the horrors of war and how devastating it is to these nations and these communities and the people that survive and the people who served in the army? Like, is it trying to critique something about military and the way that we use weapons of war? Like, I was trying to figure out what this movie was trying to say, but at the same time, it, it's it it's like holding Napoleon in a certain regard at the same time. So I really struggled to figure out, is this movie trying to critique the nature of war and how we use power? And so then that final tallying of the dead seems to support maybe that this is critiquing what Napoleon did, but even larger than that, how we wage war. But I don't feel like that's backed up with the movie itself. So I really struggled with that because I felt like I was missing something. I was like, what is this film trying to say? What is this trying to get me to think about? I didn't know what to make of it. It felt like there was an idea there, but I couldn't piece it together.
Yeah, I had a similar thought. I think that this movie is like a pretty scathing uh, portrayal of Napoleon, and I say that mostly because um, I think in general history is kind of conflicted about how it feels about Napoleon. Obviously, obviously many died at his expense. We know that. But there are aspects about him that the movie doesn't showcase at all. In the genius, the strategy, like the movie's not interested in that at all. So it feels pretty like oversimplified to just list the numbers of people that are dead at his expense at the end of the movie, which is something that I think people are kind of aware of already. I always find it in general in movies fascinating when they do, especially ones that are based on real events, when they do this like white text on screen of like where people ended up or what happened to them. Air does this as well. I mean, so many of these movies do like where they ended up, how they died, who they died with, how much money they made, whatever it is, right? And it always feels like such a um, intentional choice of what facts they choose to include on screen to end the movie with, because it's what you leave with at the end, and it's often associated with what that person's legacy is. So, in the context of some of these movies, it's this person went on to support X cause and dedicated the rest of their life to nonprofit, whatever it is, right? Or it's this person made X billions of dollars and then died in prison, whatever it is, right? In this, the movie's making kind of a a thesis point around what it thinks the legacy of Napoleon is. And it feels just kind of like a little oversimplified to me to just include the numbers of people that died at his expense. But I think it does support your thesis, Sarah, of like this movie, I guess, is captivated by the um, lives lost by this one ambitious man, because the rest of the movie doesn't have anything else interesting to say, and then there's this kind of final cherry on top of just listing numbers of people that have died at his expense. The only thing that I think is like complicates that perspective a little bit is the text that then comes on screen of Napoleon's final words before he died was France Army Josephine, and then France and Army like kind of fade away and Josephine's just lit up on screen, which supports the 4 hour director's cut of this movie as well. So I think that between those two aspects of it, that seems to be what this movie's most interested by. But I don't know how those two things play together. And I thought that the ending white text on screen choices were in line with the rest of the movie, but then offered, I think, no additional insight into what this movie's actually about, which I just thought was kind of a um it's consistent, it's consistent with the rest of the movie. So I guess they have that going for them.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think you're both spot on. It seemed like a strong point to try and make that I don't feel like the movie made the rest of the time, just with the realities of war, etc. And that those last his last words on screen again just left me begging for like more meat with Josephine and that backstory, because the movie certainly in its very last gasp underlines how important that relationship was, and yet doesn't deliver on how important that relationship was in the prior 2.5 hours.
Yeah. So between the cannonball and the horse and then this ending white text, I think pretty pretty much bookends this movie. Yeah. In what everything that happens in the middle. Uh any other thoughts about Napoleon before we wrap up?
Can we talk about Josephine for just a hot second?
Please.
Yes.
Um, so obviously Vanessa Kirby is fantastic. She's great in everything. I want her to just be in all of the things and win all of the awards. But something that I thought was really interesting is after they divorce, the house that she goes to, the estate that she goes to is Chateau de Malmaison, and that means maison Malmaison means bad house or house of ill repute. And I thought that that was so interesting
Oh.
that that is the place where she lived. And in my little tiny research that I did after watching this movie, uh, Josephine actually took that estate that was really run down and she restored it and like imported a lot of like plants and animals, and she had like these exquisite greenhouses and these beautiful gardens and stuff. And so if we're requesting other movies to be made, I would like to see the movie of Josephine doing all of that. So like movie starts with her getting a divorce and she's left with this really really weird place. She's in this rundown house and then she seeks to build beauty out of destruction. And I think that that would also
Mm,
be a really beautiful, fascinating character study about this really really interesting character.
huh. That would be cool. That's a great little detail. I think that would be fantastic. I think Josephine was what's the word I'm looking for, but easily the most like overlooked character. I almost wonder if they had just given more life to Josephine, if it would have made the movie like passable for me. Like it was like she was just like a prop on set at times for like Napoleon to just kind of have somebody to talk to or around, and Josephine was just kind of skipped by. Like that's a great detail of her going through that. Uh, there's so much there. Uh,
Yeah.
Reading all the like the backstory historically, Josephine was apparently like super jealous, like viciously jealous of Napoleon, which I don't think is how it's portrayed in the movie. It's flipped the other way around. And so that would have been interesting to see like Josephine really like pursue and want to go after Napoleon. But one of the historians I read also said that like there was a really great dialogue between Josephine and Napoleon when he goes off to Spain, and Josephine asks him, "Why on earth do you want to go on fighting battles?" And Napoleon says, "Because I am a victim of history. I have no option." Like,
Hmm.
give me that dialogue. Like, that says so much
Yes.
about both of them. She's like, "Why do you want these things? I want you here. Why don't you run your empire?" And then Napoleon's like, "I'm a victim. I have to do," like, gah. Josephine could have added so much more and just was skipped over. Like, give me those questions of like the things she wants from him and those, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I completely agree with your point around had Josephine, I think, been more three-dimensional as well, it would have sold their love story a lot better and
Hmm.
sold that dynamic between them because you're right, she kind of is just like the object of his desire and his obsession. And we see like a few moments of her standing her ground or asserting her opinions, but on the whole, like she doesn't get a lot. And the real life Josephine is incredibly dynamic and is such a thinker and has her own opinions and ways of doing things that she doesn't bow to his ego. And I can see that that is a captivating thing for um a man who is insecure like Napoleon, who like wants to prove himself with this woman that is incredibly bright and vibrant. Like we don't get any of that. And um I think that had maybe the script gone back to and studied more of those letters, just honestly take from the letters. You know what I mean? There's already so much there that is so dynamic from the historical artifacts. Take from that or be inspired by that, you know?
But instead, we get Destiny has brought me this lamb chop. Incredible. This is
I forgot
cinema,
about
guys.
that.
This is fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. My one last shout out is just I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but real sets, real production sets. It's just great to see that there's at least the few in the industry that can still one decide to like fund and try and attempt to do that, but two like have the organizational abilities to manage this entire crew of people that can then manage entire production sets at this scale. It was fascinating to learn the ways that Ridley Scott like managed his team, and he would have the like 40 some heads of each of the departments go through like page by page in the script to flag like where are there going to be production issues, what's the strategy for executing on all of these. Just the amount of like organization that it takes to be a filmmaker, I think is fascinating, that I think we don't really think about or talk about as much, and at this scale it's just multiplied that much greater. So the sheer skill set ability for Ridley Scott to make this movie, I think, is pretty impressive, and one that is, I think, like rarer to see in the modern age where we have so many technology tools available to us to just do take a lot of shortcuts now. Um, so I hope that he still continues to make movies at this scale and that he'll keep it alive and well.
Yeah, yeah. Just with a different screenplay.
Yeah.
Yes. He needs to know this about himself and choose
Yes.
people that, have written great scripts because he's done it in the past. I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
fascinating. In his filmography, he's paired up with fabulous scripts and executed them incredibly well. So it can be done. We wish it was done for Napoleon. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of Napoleon. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us, and thank you to you, Dillon, for coming on, sharing your thoughts, perspectives, and heartburn about Napoleon. Where can people find more of you and your perspectives and work on the internet?
thank you again for having me. I actually am a recently new co-host of a podcast called The Leadership Opinions for Ordinary People, or Loop for short, where me and a colleague of mine, we're two everyday managers, and we talk about all the things that make us tick and how we're going to become better leaders and take better care of the people in our charge. So come check us out.
Love it. Loop will include all of the information of where you can find Dillon and the Loop podcast in the show notes. So make sure to check them out. They have some really amazing conversations over there. All right. Well, Movies and Us, our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent some time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Ridley Scott's Napoleon. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at @MoviesAndUsPod, or you can email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week for a special episode, actually. It will be our 300th episode extravaganza. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you very soon.